Homeless girl saves millionaire in shocking way. What happens next will break you. The rain poured relentlessly over the city as Maya, a soaked and shivering 17-year-old homeless girl, stepped through the wide sliding doors of the city hospital. Her clothes clung to her thin frame, her sneakers torn and waterlogged, leaving muddy prints on the sterile hospital floor. In her arms, she struggled to support the unconscious weight of a man nearly twice her size. His head tilted back, eyes closed, lips tinged with blue. The bright hospital lights stung her tired eyes, but she didn't stop. This wasn't about her, not tonight. The man she carried was Daniel Grant, a billionaire CEO whose name appeared on billboards and in business magazines. But none of that mattered right now. All Maya knew was that she saw him collapse outside the café, gripping his chest, gasping, and falling to the ground as strangers walked around him like he didn't exist. She was the only one who stopped, the only one who kneeled beside him in the freezing rain and screamed for help that never came. Now here she was, dragging him into a hospital full of people who looked past her as if she were invisible. Nurses brushed past, patients groaned in nearby chairs. Phones rang at the reception desk, and no one even turned their head. "Please," Maya whispered, her voice hoarse from shouting in the storm. "He's not breathing right. Please help." No one listened. One receptionist looked her over. Wet clothes, bruised arm, dirt under her nails, and turned back to her screen. She tried again, louder this time. "He's having a heart attack. Someone help him." A man sitting near the corner scoffed, eyeing her torn hoodie and shaking head. "Probably some junkie drama," he muttered to his wife. Maya's heart pounded in anger. She lowered Daniel gently to the floor and propped his head on her lap. "He's not a junkie," she snapped back. "He's a person. He could be your brother, your father." Her voice rose until it cracked, but she didn't care. Desperation overtook fear. She pressed her ear to Daniel's chest. His heartbeat was erratic, uneven. One moment it thumped fast. The next, it slowed almost to nothing. Her mother had taught her about this kind of thing back when she was alive, before the cancer, before they lost everything. Maya stood suddenly, her bruised arm throbbing, and stormed to the nurse's station. "He's dying," she shouted, slamming her hands down on the desk. Startled nurses looked up, then looked away just as quickly. "You can't be here," one of them muttered. "Security will—" "He's not breathing right," Maya screamed louder, tears flooding her eyes. "Just because I'm homeless doesn't mean I'm lying." Everyone around her paused. For the first time, someone actually heard her. A young nurse stepped out from behind the desk and asked quietly, "Where is he?" Maya turned and led them back to the waiting area, where Daniel still lay motionless on the tile floor. The sight of his unmoving chest jolted the staff into motion. "Get a crash cart now," one of them shouted. Another nurse radioed for trauma support. In a flurry of activity, Daniel was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed through the emergency room doors. As the last set of double doors swung shut behind him, Maya stood frozen, water dripping from her sleeves, her arms aching from the weight she had carried. A tall doctor brushed past her and then turned back. "You brought him in?" he asked. She nodded silently. "You may have just saved his life," he said, almost surprised. But Maya didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel anything, except the pounding of her own heart and the cold that still clung to her skin. She walked slowly to a chair in the corner and sank into it, curling up into herself as if to disappear. All around her, life resumed. Patients murmured, babies cried, nurses typed into glowing screens. but she remained still. She had walked through the storm, carried a stranger into this building, screamed until they listened. And now all she could do was wait. Wait to see if he would survive, if her voice had mattered, if the life of a man no one stopped to help could still be saved because a homeless girl chose to care when no one else would. The sterile hospital clock ticked softly on the ICU wall as Maya sat motionless in the corner of the hallway, her soaked hoodie now slightly dried, her eyes fixed on the door that had swallowed the man she carried in. Hours had passed, maybe 3, maybe 5, but time didn't move the same when you were waiting for someone you didn't know yet couldn't bear to lose. She hadn't left the chair since they wheeled him in. A few nurses glanced her way, whispering under their breath. One of them laughed faintly and nudged another. "She looks like she just walked out of a shelter," one said. Another added, "Probably waiting for a handout." Maya heard it all, but said nothing. Her fingers fidgeted with the frayed cuff of her sleeve as her stomach growled beneath her ribs. But the emptiness inside her wasn't about food. It was heavier than that. A middle-aged nurse, less cynical than the rest, finally approached and knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, do you know him?" Maya shook her head slowly. "Not really." The nurse hesitated. "Then why are you still here?" Maya didn't answer right away. She looked down at her bruised arm, rubbed the sore spot, and let her voice out in a quiet breath. "Because no one stayed when it was my father." Her throat tightened. "He collapsed right outside this building. Nobody helped. They walked over him like he was garbage, and I couldn't get to him in time." The nurse's eyes softened, her mouth parting, as if to say something comforting. But Maya had already turned away. She didn't want sympathy. She just didn't want to leave. Inside ICU Room 7, Daniel lay beneath white sheets, tubes in his arms and monitors beeping with a steady rhythm. The chaos had passed. His heart was now beating regularly, his oxygen steady, his body stable. But when his eyes fluttered open, groggy and confused, it wasn't the machines or the ceiling lights that drew his attention. It was the soft presence of a girl curled up in a plastic chair beside him, fast asleep, head resting against the window. Her arms were folded across her chest, and despite the awkward position, her face looked peaceful in sleep. Daniel blinked, disoriented. The last thing he remembered was walking out of the café and a sharp pain in his chest. Then, nothing. "Nurse," he croaked, barely louder than a whisper. A moment later, a nurse entered and checked the monitors. "You're awake," she said with a smile. "Good. You gave us a scare." He gestured weakly toward Maya. Who is that?" The nurse glanced at the girl. "She's the one who brought you in." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Her?" The nurse nodded. "You collapsed on the street. She found you, dragged you inside, screamed until someone listened. Then she stayed. Hasn't moved since." Daniel stared at Maya for a long time. Her clothes were clearly worn, and her face too thin for someone her age. She looked like life had asked too much of her too early. And yet, she stayed. When he finally gathered enough strength to speak, his voice came out rough. "Why?" The question lingered in the air until Maya stirred, blinking awake slowly. Her eyes met his, startled to find him watching her. "You're awake," she said, her voice quiet. "You made it." He looked at her, searching for motive, for some hidden angle. "Why did you stay?" She looked down at her hands and answered without thinking. "Because if I were dying, I'd want someone to care, even if they were a stranger." The words hit him harder than any defibrillator ever could. Daniel had known fame, fortune, and flattery, but not this. Not raw, honest compassion with no strings attached. His lips parted, but he had no words. He simply looked at her, this girl with nothing, who gave him everything without asking for a single thing in return. And for the first time in years, something deep inside him cracked. The soft hum of the recovery room machines blended with the distant murmur of hospital life as days turned into weeks. And Daniel remained under observation, his body still weak but mending. Maya returned each morning, slipping quietly into the room before breakfast trays arrived, always carrying something, a crumpled paperback novel, a cup of tea. She sweet-talked a nurse into giving her, or just her presence, warm and unfiltered. Daniel no longer asked why she came. He had stopped questioning it the moment he realized her company calmed the ache in his chest more than any sedative. They began talking, not about wealth or business, but about real things. Maya told him about her childhood, how her mum used to sing to her before bed, how cancer took her mother piece by piece, how life crumbled after that. She described winters spent sleeping under bridges, libraries she hid in for warmth, and the day she taught herself to read using abandoned storybooks and hospital brochures. Daniel listened, not out of pity, but out of something else, something rare he hadn't felt in years: respect. In return, he spoke about his empire, that looked perfect from the outside, but felt hollow inside. He told her about the wife he lost to ambition, the daughter who moved across the world to get away from the weight of his expectations, and the mansion so silent it echoed. It surprised him how easily the words came when Maya was around. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just sat there, knees drawn to her chest, nodding gently with a look in her eyes that made him feel human. One afternoon, as a nurse checked Daniel's vitals, she smiled and said, "Honestly, she's better therapy than the last 5 doctors we've hired." Daniel chuckled faintly and glanced at Maya, who blushed and looked away. The staff had grown used to her now. She was no longer just that girl. She was Maya. She brought color into the dull gray room, life into Daniel's long hours of recovery. But one morning she entered differently, slower. Her steps were uneven, her lip bleeding slightly, and her hoodie sleeves tugged nervously over her hands. Daniel noticed instantly. "What happened to you?" She tried to laugh it off, said she slipped on the stairs, but the truth came out when a nurse caught her sneaking out of the janitor's supply closet that night with a blanket tucked under her arm. The next morning, Daniel was livid, not at her, but at the world. He called security, not to remove her, but to escort her properly. "Find her a clean room," he ordered, "a real one. Guest wing, warm bed, hot meals." The staff blinked. "But Mr. Grant, she's not leaving. She saved my life. It's time I returned the favor." Later that day, when Maya walked into his room and saw her name printed on a guest badge and a folded blanket waiting just for her, she froze. "What is this?" she asked, wide-eyed. Daniel smiled softly, his voice calmer than it had been in weeks. "From now on, you're not homeless," he said. "You're home. Here. With me." Her knees buckled slightly at the words, and she clutched the blanket to her chest like it was the most precious thing she'd ever been given. No one had ever said home to her with such certainty. Not since her mother died, not since the streets became her only shelter. She didn't cry, not then. She just sat beside him like always, but this time something had shifted, something invisible but real. In a world that kept pushing her out, someone had finally let her in. And in a place meant for healing broken bodies, 2 broken hearts had begun to quietly mend. The sun filtered softly through the blinds of room 217, casting golden stripes across the floor as a nurse unhooked the last of Daniel's IVs. The recovery was complete. His heart, though scarred, was stable. His body, once fragile in a hospital bed, now stood stronger, fueled not just by treatment, but by something far more powerful: connection. Maya stood near the window, her arms crossed gently, watching quietly as he adjusted the collar of his fresh dress shirt, the first proper clothes he'd worn in weeks. "You sure you're ready to face the world again?" she asked with a small smile. Daniel turned, buttoning the cuff on his sleeve, and looked at her, not with the gaze of a man seeing a charity case or someone he pitied, but with warmth, pride, and an odd sense of awe. "Not alone," he said, "but with you, yes." Outside, the media had gathered. News trucks, flashing cameras, reporters with mics, all pointing toward the hospital entrance. Word had gotten out. The reclusive tech tycoon had nearly died and was being released today. Daniel hated the spotlight, but this time he knew what he wanted to say. He didn't flinch as the automatic doors slid open and the cameras began flashing wildly. Instead, he reached for Maya's hand and stepped into the chaos. The crowd hushed as they noticed her. This thin girl, in jeans and a hospital lanyard, standing beside the millionaire, like she belonged there. He didn't let go of her hand. "I'm alive today," Daniel began, his voice firm. "Not because of doctors, not because of my money, not even because of luck. I'm alive because of her." He looked down at Maya, then back at the reporters. A homeless girl with nothing to gain and every reason to walk away, chose to care, chose to help, chose to fight for a stranger's life. The silence from the crowd was deafening. She reminded me that humanity isn't found in boardrooms or bank accounts. It's in compassion. It's in someone who has nothing, giving everything. The clip would later go viral, but Maya barely heard it. Her heart thudded with disbelief, her cheeks burning under the sudden attention. She wasn't used to being seen. After the media faded and Daniel's car pulled away from the curb, the real changes began. Within weeks, Daniel met with lawyers and filed papers that shocked his inner circle. He made Maya his legal ward. She was no longer without family. He brought her into his world, but on her terms. He didn't want to change her. He wanted to empower her. Together, they worked with the hospital board to launch something permanent, something lasting. Maya Hearts, a non-profit built in her name, focused on helping homeless teens with shelter, healthcare, and education. Maya was there at the ribbon cutting, her name on the banner, her voice shaky but proud, as she gave her first public speech. Reporters asked if she ever imagined this moment. She replied, "I didn't even imagine tomorrow." The organization grew quickly, donations pouring in from people who saw something pure in her story. Maya was no longer invisible, and yet she remained grounded. Despite her new life, she returned every week to the same hospital, this time not as a lost girl sleeping in closets, but as a volunteer. She helped clean rooms, bring warm meals, and sit with patients who had no one. Nurses greeted her with hugs. Doctors asked her opinion. Patients clung to her words. There was something about Maya, gentle, quiet, yet unshakably strong. One evening, a young runaway girl came into the ER, cold and afraid. Maya wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and whispered, "You're safe now." It was full circle. Daniel often watched from a distance, his chest full of emotion. He had built companies, towers, and legacy, but this, he thought, this girl was his greatest achievement. Maya had saved his life once, yes, but she had gone on to save others in ways he never could. She turned pain into power, loss into love, and invisibility into impact. And though her journey began alone, in the shadows of a city that never looked her way, it ended with the world listening. Because sometimes, the most broken soul doesn't just heal, it becomes the heart of something greater. And Maya, she had become the heart of hope itself.